Okay, so early on, I mean way early, like Bible times, before any of the big celebrities like Moses or David or Abraham came along. Not quite, quote, in the beginning, but then not too long after that either. Back then, everybody pretty much had the same deal going. You had just a few options on how you could make ends meet. You could be a farmer, raise livestock, be a hunter. If you were really good at it and you lived near the right people, maybe you could make clothes or tents or stuff like that. But there weren't really any insurance salesmen or custom cabinet makers or bridal shops or pizza places. So most people worked on the basic stuff and traded for the other stuff they wanted. You know, the cattle farmers would trade leather and milk and cheese and beef jerky to the sheep farmers who had wool and mutton and the spicy cylinders of lamb that they used to make gyros. The guys who had vineyards were popular with everyone because wine goes with both gyros and beef jerky, I hear. Also, grapes and raisins are popular with everyone except for fig and date farmers. Anyway, it was hard to make change for a cow unless you happened to have the right size sheep. And if you didn't, well, things got pretty bad for the sheep. So one day this exotic caravan rolls through town and they have all this interesting stuff like spices and baubles and trinkets and things like that. So Mrs. Tentmaker decides she can sew some bling onto her tents to make them more expensive for the holidays. Also, she can market the new goat-resistant model of tent for the season. So they barter and haggle, and afterwards they have much smaller tent piles, fewer goats, and now they have a basket full of shiny stuff. And that shiny stuff, they say, doesn't need to be fed like the goats, and it isn't nearly as hard to carry in your sleeve pocket as a tent. Say, Mrs. Tentmaker, why don't you hang some of these shiny things on your collar so Mrs. O'Ahmed can see them? And so instantly jewelry and currency were invented by the tent makers. Now, the O'Ahmeds were always self-conscious about their struggling and isolated fig and date plantation when they compared themselves to the relative wealth of the tent makers. So they started decorating their residences unnecessarily, and this led to the Great Goat and Bauble War of 1754 BC. And so by the time of the Bible celebrities, those trinkets and baubles had eventually turned into gold and silver currency. Bartering was still done with sheep and goats and cows, as well as wine and grapes. Figs and dates did well too, but not like gold and silver. Also, people had learned how to build things like cities and walls and pyramids, so goats weren't eating tents like the old days, except as snacks. Time passed, pants were invented, followed by pockets, which proved good for carrying currency, though not so good for carrying raisins or goats or tents. The enterprising explorers of the American continent filled their pockets with bling and went stomping through the underbrush trying to make deals, at gunpoint if necessary. But finding that the residents only had groceries to trade, they opted to take New York instead. This made a lot of people on both sides very upset and resulted in a lot of violence and impoliteness. So to keep things civil, everyone agreed that money should be made of paper. The guy who kept all the gold and issued all the paper is a guy named Midas. He starved to death under mysterious circumstances, and the investigation continues. We still use that paper today, although we paint it different colors just to keep the middle-aged folks nervous about the economy. Then about 60 years ago, a teenager named Johnny Visa took his girlfriend out for a burger and fries kind of date, realizing all too late that he had left his wampum and his other dungarees. They used words like wampum and dungarees back then. But anyway, since he knew the burger shop owner, he offered his driver's license as collateral until he could come back discreetly with a goat, some paper money. And that's when he got the idea to start using a card for credit to cut down on how much paper he needed to carry in his trouser pockets. Filthy rich from the idea, he later married that girl, Susie Mastercard, but they split up a few years later over charge disputes. Then in 2001, we entered the future. A computer named HAL took over all the financial credit card systems, starting with Y2K. Now we just trade digital credits back and forth, and machines tell us that our credits are worth less than our paper, which was never a good substitute for wampum or gold or figs or goats. It is the age of the apocalypse. Robots run amok, killing humans and acquiring their credits. One became the governor of California. Most human survivors exist in a prison known as the middle class, working strenuously to pay artificial credits to a robot for possessions we need to impress our fellow prisoners. And that, my friends, is the whole real history of money.